So after the campfire chat, and even before that, a lot of you have been asking for an updated version. What is the rogue going to look like after the buffs? Has anything really changed? And has it changed since your previous build? And I'll say absolutely. We have learned a lot, and also we know what the buffs are. And to be fair, the buffs for the rogue didn't really change a whole lot. Regardless, this is an absolutely amazing build, and I might even provide an update later on how to have infinite energy with it, although I'm not quite there at that point. With that said, let's dive into everything you're going to need to know. There's a link in the description for the build description and the stats and everything, which I'll even showcase in the video. Let's get into it. So diving into this build, one thing you're gonna notice is that we're actually not using a basic ability, and this might be surprising to some of you, but that it actually does not work with our heart that we're gonna be using, which is incredibly important. Now, if you are earlier on into the game, you might need to go ahead and use a basic instead of another skill later on that I'll talk about. But for the purposes of when I'm using it, I have enough energy generation in order to not use the basic at all, which is really, really nice, specifically for speed clearing. Our main skill is going to be Twisting Blades as usual. I mean, did anyone else expect anything else when we're considering the meta builds? I mean, it's going to be Twisting Blades. The Siphoning Strikes actually did get a small buff, so this will go ahead and be a little bit better. And it is still solid. It is one of our only ways to sustain. We're going to be picking up Sturdy for the close damage reduction. We have Shadow Step, really, really important to help you move through the dungeon, and to, more importantly, break CC. Very, very crucial for that. Picking up Weapon Mastery for some extra damage. We're also going to be picking up Concussive because we are going to be knocking back and knocking down. Now, we are not picking up Trick Attacks, or we are not picking up Rapid Gambits because we're actually not dazing enemies. The aspect that does cause daze actually does not work with our heart, which is really, really unfortunate, so we cannot take that. The heart is good enough, though, that we will be foregoing that for the time being. Concealment here is going to be the replacement for that basic. So once again, if you do not have the energy generation on your items, or you potentially do not have the aspects rolled properly, which we'll go over later, this will be probably a little bit difficult to do unless you're perfectly amazing at managing all this. The reason why we go for this is A, it's going to be a stealth option, which is going to help with one of our aspects and give you even more CC than we had before. B, we're going to get energy when we actually proc it. And C, we're going to get vulnerable when we use a skill that breaks concealment, which means that when we use Death Trap, when we use Poison Trap out of concealment, or heck, even Twisting Blades if you wish to, you're going to make everyone vulnerable by that skill, just naturally. This is very, very critical because any other form of vulnerable through Blast Trappers or through any other option that we previously used does not necessarily work with our heart. So we need to find a different option, and there comes Concealment. Poison Trap is going to be picked up for the knockdown and just synergy with our other Trapper aspects. Then we have Poison Imbuement as our main damaging ability. This works really, really well with a lot of the crits that we're going to be pumping out with the heart. And of course, the options to get a little bit extra poisoning out there through the Poison Trap, reducing our damage taken, etc. Picking up Frigid Finesse for the extra damage with our boots. We're going to be constantly chilling them and actually constantly freezing them as well. Precision Imbuement to give us extra crit strike chance. Then we move down to the Death Trap, which we're going to be picking up, and we're going to be picking up some energy generation. Trap Mastery for the extra crit strike chance. Innervation for extra lucky hit chance to gain energy. This is going to be really, really nice. You could also potentially run the Haste and Adrenaline Rush if you decide to, you're clearing pretty quickly and you want to go ahead and pick up that energy regeneration. That could be used in place of Innervation. It really depends on how quick you are at moving through things. If you're hitting things more often, then Innervation tends to be a little bit better. Then we have lastly our key passive, which is going to be Exposure. Now, Exposure doesn't do as well in this build with our heart. However, it's still solid. If you have any other, I guess you'd say, problems with the Exposure aspect, you can potentially run momentum or close quarters combat. Unfortunately, all of these kind of don't work as well with the heart. It's just the nature of the barber, which we'll talk about later on. It's unfortunately just not really well designed with the rogue at this point, or at least it's not really incorporated well into the rogue skills when you need to deal direct damage. But that's gonna be the skills. Let's dive into the aspects. So when diving into the aspects, there's something that you really have to pay attention to, because you might be asking, why aren't you using this aspect? Why are you using this one? Why aren't you using some sort of skill? And that is because the barber here, the heart, specifically prevents any damage that we're dealing until minimum 2 seconds, or minimum whenever we actually kill that enemy. Therefore, any aspect, for example, let me pull up the blast trappers just to show you all here. This one basically says dealing direct damage. So anything that's going to deal direct damage, or says that you have to deal direct damage, will not happen until the barber explodes. Therefore, it's not particularly great with this build. However, things like the shared misery aspect that say when you hit or when you use a skill, those ones will work without dealing the damage. This is very, very important. Therefore, we're going to be using the aspect of shared misery to start us off. This is going to be an excellent one with our mass amount of CC that we have. Super strong to be able to spread out that CC. Aspect of the protector. As I mentioned earlier, if you're struggling with energy generation problems, you're going to want to swap into that basic skill instead of concealment. And then you're also going to want to replace the protector aspect here with aspect of might. Again, this playstyle, if you're not used to it, can feel a little bit awkward if you don't have the proper energy generation with another aspect that I'm going to go over. Frostbitten aspect, this is absolutely amazing, because whenever we go ahead and hit with our grenade skills, which happens with our key passive, well, we have a chance equal to double or critical strike chance to be instantly frozen. This is absolutely just amazing when you actually get it off. Keep in mind that this is mainly going to happen after your barber explodes. So ideally with this farming strategy, you're going to be grouping up enemies, hitting them a couple times. It's going to explode with that initial burst, and you should be CCing them and then basically one-shotting them directly after. You should spend no more time than about 3 seconds to 4 seconds on a standard elite pack in general, unless you're pushing super hard. And this build can actually do a little bit of that. Cheats aspect is our next one, because we're going to be CCing so much with the shared misery, with our freezes, with our knockdowns. Guess what? We're going to take less damage from crowd control enemies, which works really well against dot effects and things like that. Penitent Greaves, this is pretty must have if you want to use the Frigid Finesse passive, because we need that chill effect, and this is the best way to get it. Aspect of Corruption is going to be our main DPS source. Poison Imbuement still the best single target damage on the rogue, and well, Aspect of Corruption helps that a ton. Aspect of Disobedience for extra armor. Opportunist aspect, this one's a little bit more complicated, okay? And actually, let me just go ahead and expand this a little bit so you guys can see just a little bit better. But the way this works is when we break stealth with an attack, we're going to drop a cluster of exploding stun grenades. What this means is, let's say we dive into an enemy pack with Shadow Step. We pop Concealment, we pop Death Trap. Death Trap procs, it makes everyone vulnerable, it groups them up, but at the same time we're dropping those stun grenades. Well, guess what? Because we go ahead and hit a chilled enemy with our stun grenade, we're going to go ahead and instantly freeze them. This is a very powerful combination, because we are not only stunning them and then spreading that, we're also freezing them and spreading that. Very strong. And this is where the aspect really matters. For the concealment portion is the aspect of the Umbral. Because we're crowd controlling so often, we are easily going to get our energy back. All we need to do is crowd control essentially one person, and assuming you have a near max like a 3 or a 4, we're going to be getting that 3 or 4 energy back. But guess what? Because of the aspect of shared misery, we actually have a very good chance with the lucky hit proc to spread that. But not only that, but we also have the knockdowns, we also have the death trap, which are also going to all apply CC. We also have the stuns from the aspect here. All of these are going to generate energy. What this allows us to do is pop off essentially 4 to 5 twisting blades instantly, proc our death trap, things like that if you wish, to regenerate more energy, and overall just give us so much energy back. This is absolutely critical. We have the Edge Masters aspect, because we will be at high energy, roughly speaking, most of the time. If you're comboing correctly. And then the Blade Dancer's aspect, we want this mainly for the aspect itself rather than the actual damage it's going to provide, because we're actually going to be dealing a ton of damage just based off of all of our CC and such. Going over the stats real quick here, there's a lot of things to consider, but I actually have all of the stats on the site if you want to check out the individual ones. Generally speaking, you're going to be wanting to look for critical strike chance, critical strike damage, because that's going to help with the barber. We're also going to be wanting to look for cooldown reduction, energy cost reduction. This is a very, very important one in the amulet. And we're also going to want to look for any sort of damage reduction that we can get, total armor on the chest piece and pants. This is very, very typical and very standard for any sort of build in the game, pretty much. As for the gems and hearts, we generally want to use the emeralds and topaz. However, you can use rubies if you're finding that you're just dying or having a little bit of a struggle time pushing or doing higher tiers just naturally rather than when you're being CC'd. As for hearts, we have the cluster munitions. As you can see, when we go ahead and basically use abilities, we have a chance to launch grenades that deal damage and stun enemies. Once again, this works with our frostbite aspect, which works with our shared misery aspect. We also are running revenge for the extra damage suppression, and of course, as I've said many times, the barber. Barber is probably the most crucial one for most builds in the game, and that is mainly because what happens is it turns every single one of your crits into an AoE damage ability. So let's say I were to use my twisting blades, I were to hit someone with it. Well, if it's a crit, it absorbs that damage, it spins around afterwards, and it hits everyone. If that's all critting, guess what? It's gonna hit all of them, and they're all gonna explode. With Death Trap, this is really, really good because you're gonna group them together, and you're gonna instantly CC them, which all those CC, basically you're gonna boost up your damage. And for those of you that didn't know, the barber actually detonates early if you kill someone. So you might be asking, wait, if I want the CC applied after I've already hit and it blows up, wouldn't they already be dead? Well, actually, they might be, they may not be. Most of the time, if you're pushing decently, then you're probably not going to be. So you need 2 rotations of this, but luckily, that second rotation is going to detonate instantly because you're going to have all the status effects on the enemies, which is really, really nice. As for specialization, I generally like Inner Sight a little bit more, but you can use Preparation to reduce that ultimate cooldown and get you a lot of value in those situations. And then into Paragon board. Now this one, again, does change based on if you're going to use your basic skill or not, because there is a really, really nice board to pick up. We're going to be starting off with Closer on our starting board for additional damage reduction. We're going to have a focus on damage reduction because that's going to help us obviously stay alive. Next board is going to be the Deadly Ambush. We're going to get that Deadly Ambush legendary node for extra critical strike damage basically all the time, as well as the Diminished Glyph. This is going to really help us boost up this rare node specifically, but also giving us damage reduction against vulnerable enemies. Then we're going to move into the Tricks of the Trade, and this is where you do a couple modifications if you are running that basic skill. You're going to be removing these points down here all the way into that rare node, and you're going to be moving them to try to pick up that Tricks of the Trade node, giving us extra damage when we use our basic and cycle through. Both can be very, very solid, and it really depends on what you're going to be looking for. As I mentioned earlier, if you have the aspects to support this build or not. Then you're going to have the Turf Glyph, giving us extra damage reduction against close enemies. Super, super solid. Into the Cheap Shot build, Paragon board here for the Control Glyph, giving us extra damage against slowed or chilled, or stunned or frozen, which we're going to have lots of stunned or frozen enemies, giving us basically 20% increased damage a very, very large portion of the time. And lastly, we're going to be picking up the Combat Glyph. This is also very important in order for us to have a very, very big supply of energy and giving us that extra critical strike damage. So jumping into a Nightmare Dungeon here for you all, just to showcase what this build looks like. It's very important to note that my aspect of the Umbral is straight up a Codex power, as you can see here. And because of that, I do not restore a lot of energy on CC. Despite that, I still find Concealment to be a little bit better with the Barber. Once again, it's for that guaranteed vulnerable application. Now, there are 2 ways I like to use Concealment. Either A, I like to go ahead and use Concealment with Death Trap to get that nice AoE. B, I like to go ahead and use Concealment with Poison Trap to keep my Death Trap to allow me to gain additional energy off that passive. Or C, just use my 2 traps jumping in and then use twisting blades to apply the vulnerable on an AoE. All of which are good. But first, I'll show you all what that looks like when you just jump in and use it immediately. You can see there, this is a tier 44, nothing too crazy by any means, but I jumped in, instantly one-shot those elites, which is pretty nice. Okay, so now we have the kind of groups here. I was trying to go ahead and find some big groups for you all, but I guess we'll just go ahead and kill off these ones over here. One really nice thing about the concealment as well is if you don't have like a big heavy hitter or a big group to kill, one thing that you're going to want to do is actually basically use it as a CC break, because you can do that now, which is really, really nice, right? Because it is a unstoppable move. And here I am reading the skills while I'm getting blasted. You'll notice that my energy is going down pretty significantly here. And again, the main reason for that is because I have a very low aspect of the Umbral, and you actually need big groups to be able to have infinite energy, which is very, very important. You can see there, instantly one-shotting the group once again, pretty nice. For lower tiers like this, ironically, you know, for a tier 44 here, actually, it's potentially a little bit better in some scenarios to run that basic ability, because what ends up happening is you actually have a little bit of tricky energy problems because you're just one-shotting everything. You don't even need to CC it, which is really, really nice. So you potentially might want to run that basic if you don't have that aspect of the Umbral, as I was mentioning earlier. But a pretty simple situation here. We're going to go through, kind of clear out all the different areas here. Nothing too complicated. Open up all the cages. As you can see, I'm really not having any issues whatsoever. But one thing that's really, really important for those of you that might be used to having kind of a basic on your bar is that sometimes you just have this tendency to start spamming. And you do not want to do that, because you know you have skills on your bar. You want to use them at the right moments in order for you to generate that energy back. And one situation is like right there where, well, I could use my traps to kind of one-shot the enemies and then use concealment to regenerate some of that energy. And what is this guy doing, man? This guy is just teleporting all over the place here. Let's just nuke him down real quickly. One thing you'll notice is that, oh man, do I have to walk all the way back here? One thing to notice with the rogue in this build is that if you can group up the enemies, you're going to be far stronger. In general, actually, most builds are going to be up that way, simply for the fact that you're just gonna, well, get more value out of your abilities because of the barber detonating on an AoE at this point, which is really, really valuable. But I'm gonna go ahead and skip ahead until maybe we actually get back to the start of the dungeon, because I'm backtracking through this entire thing. Wonderful. All right, we're back and we're moving through the rest of the dungeon here. But I want to reiterate this because I think a lot of people seeing this build or using it or trying it for the first time might be a little bit confused. This is one of the more complicated builds that you're going to have to learn because of the importance of using your abilities correctly for your essence, or your energy regeneration in a lot of situations. Okay, so make sure to either A, use your concealment to one-shot them with your vulnerable on death trap, or in this situation, right, we're going to go ahead and use the vulnerable or the concealment on poison trap to go ahead and apply that on an AoE, and then use death trap to bring everyone in and one-shot them, as you saw there. Now this is a little bit awkward because they're like freezing me and, you know, getting in the way, but as you saw, if you're able to group them up, you basically just one-shot the entire group very easily. There is no problems whatsoever, which is really, really nice. So that's kind of the idea with the build. And if you're in a situation like this where you don't have your death trap up, well, make sure to not just immediately use your concealment, right? Go ahead and jump in, potentially use a couple twisting blades, and then use concealment to generate that essence back, and then apply that vulnerable that we're looking for. Now I'll show you the boss damage here, which honestly, that's where the build doesn't really do as well as like the poison imbuement shadow clone build, but it's still very, very good. In fact, this is a great option to show you all because we have the triple sort of mobs here, which is kind of funny. But you can see here with the trap, you could still one-shot them, even if, well, they're not close together, which they're not right now, which is a little unfortunate. But we're getting there slowly but surely. And there we go. We'll knock this one down. A little bit awkward in this situation. We'd actually prefer them to be grouped up. One thing that's really nice about this build in a lot of situations when you're killing bosses is if there's just one boss, you can actually burn through their break bar extremely quickly, because again, any skill that's going to break that stealth is going to drop those stun grenades, which is really, really nice. So if you have that option, go ahead and do that. But overall, very simplistic, very easy build to use, and will absolutely blow up your enemies. Hopefully you enjoyed, guys. This is the no basic rogue meta build. I'll have some more builds in the future showcasing more traditional styles of play, because I know some of you aren't super into these types of styles, but this is really, really solid, and I definitely recommend giving this a shot. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.